Hey everyone, thanks again for making it to the final session of the Builder Day. I know it's been a long day, but hopefully you've gotten a lot out of it and even more from this session. So on the agenda for today, we'll do a quick introduction, understanding the problem space, and looking at some of those friction points in the software development lifecycle that we're helping you smooth out. We'll be running through Amazon Q Developer and going through a demo of what that might look like to integrate in one of your development teams. We'll then also be going through Amazon Code Whisperer. So what's the problem space that we're really looking to address? A recent Gartner study identified that around 73% of a developer's time is actually spent on maintenance, on that undifferentiated heavy lifting. So really not doing the innovative and exciting and valuable coding that all of us as developers really want to be doing and that businesses really want us to be doing as well. So what we're doing here at AWS is examining that development lifecycle and all of the different pain points within it, from the research and development stage where you really have to understand your business domain, all the way through to development and then onto maintenance and management of code. So examining this lifecycle, what our teams have developed is Amazon Q. So this service is really there to help you build out applications and infrastructure on AWS. It's built on top of generative AI, as well as using AWS's really, storied history in AI with 17 years of experience. It's available, wherever you're working. So, for example, it's available in the AWS console. So you might want to be asking Amazon Q about different services, about different features, and it can really help you sort of pass that documentation and highlight the information that you're looking for. It is also available in your AWS console, so maybe you want to troubleshoot an error that you're seeing. You can actually copy that error into Amazon Q and really help to identify and reduce some of that friction, so not having to go out, search Stack Overflow or search through the AWS documentation for that. It's also available in your IDE with Amazon Code Whisperer, so you're able to optimize code, write tests, improve on your coding and summarize pull requests and the like. And our demo will actually go through that for you today. We do also have Amazon Q Code Transformation, which is a feature that we recently released. And what that is designed to do is actually to help you complete language upgrades. We're also looking to release Amazon Q Code Transformation to accelerate migration from Windows to Linux. For example, a team within Amazon actually used Amazon Q Code Transformation to transform 1,000 Java applications. So they migrated from Java 8 to Java 17 within 2 days. So that took on average 10 minutes per application. And I think the longest took about 1 hour. So we have noted that within a lot of development teams, that can be quite a challenging task and quite a time-consuming task. So we're here to sort of help in that the management and maintenance phase of the software development life cycle to really streamline that process. Amazon Q, as I mentioned, is available wherever you're doing your coding. So that's in the AWS Management Console, whether you're troubleshooting there or wanting to understand more about your infrastructure, through to your IDEs, and even within Slack. So my team, that's a particular favorite. We've integrated the Slack chatbot and we ask questions all the time. So now I'm going to run through a day in the life of a developer with Amazon Q. I've just joined a development team. It's myself and Pav working together to release a feature. Our team application is fairly straightforward. What we're doing is summarizing a document and then creating a word cloud out of that summary. It's a pretty straightforward application. I've got my Python front-end application. I've got 2 back-end APIs. There's a word cloud generator in Java. And there's also a content summary generator that's in TypeScript. And I'm using Amazon Bedrock model to actually summarize that text for me. So you see there's a little bit of complexity there because I have a couple of different languages that I'm using. And as I said, I'm new to this code base, so I'm really looking for how I can get started. we've got 2 development tasks that we need to complete before we can actually release the new version of our application. And I'm first in, so I take up that first feature. As you can see, we've got this word cloud generator API, and at the moment, the response is actually producing a raw image in bytes. But really, I want to make it a little bit more user-friendly, so what I'd like to do is actually upload a file to S3, and then create a link to that file in S3. But I'm, as I mentioned, not super familiar with this code base, so I'm really looking for some help from Q for how to get started. So within my IDE, I can actually go and click on the Amazon Q link, and within that, with my file open to provide the context, I can ask, what does this application do? And an Amazon Q is actually going to generate a summary for me for what that application does. And as you can see, it gives me like a nice summary. It's a word cloud, generating that word cloud image. So for my feature, I want to be pushing things to S3 and then accessing it via a link. So I'm not super familiar with AWS and how to do that. So I'm asking Q, what might be a way in which I can achieve that? So how can I upload that word cloud image to S3, and what's the best way to return a link? So Amazon Q is going to generate a response for me based on its knowledge about AWS infrastructure, and it produces an answer that points me in the direction of how to implement S3 pre-signed URLs. And it actually takes me through the basic steps. So I can go through and implement that with Java SDK if I'd like, but I'm going to take it a step further, and I ask Amazon Q, can you please create some code snippets for me so that I don't have to go out and search the documentation for how to generate this pre-signed URL? So Amazon Q is able to provide me with this code snippet, so I can have a look at it, I can double check that it's doing what I want it to be doing, I can copy and paste that snippet into my file and think job done. But I take a step back and I realize I've probably skipped a couple of steps. I haven't actually got an S3 bucket created in order to put these files in. So I'm going to navigate across to my infrastructure file, my backend stack, and I have a look. I've got it there in CDK in Python, and I found my word cloud Lambda function that I saw the code for before. So I'm going to ask Amazon Q now, how can I actually create this S3 bucket using CDK? So maybe I'm not sure about what class I need to use, or I don't want to navigate to the documentation to look that up. So using Amazon Q, I'm going to generate that code snippet for how to create that S3 bucket. So I can scroll up, I'll have a look, just verify that it's creating what I want it to do. I can see it's imported that AWS CDK and AWS S3. It's written in Python, so it's actually identified the language that I'm using without me telling it to, as it's based on that file context. It's linked me to the documentation, so I go and read up on more of it if I'd like. And then I'm going to copy and paste that code snippet into my infrastructure file. I might need to tweak some things. It's not necessarily going to be 100% perfect, but I know what classes that I need to be using. From there, having a think about it and reading through those instructions, I realize I probably have to grant some permissions to the S3 bucket and to that Lambda IAM role in order for me to actually be able to put some files into S3 and also read files from S3. So I asked Amazon Q, how can I actually create the code snippet to grant those permissions to my Lambda IAM role. From there, it creates that code snippet which grants permissions for both read and write access to S3 to my IAM role for that Lambda. And so I, once again, copy that into my infrastructure file. So the final thing I'm thinking that I need is, it's all well and good, I've got this brand new S3 bucket, but my code doesn't know what I've called that S3 bucket. So I have a look at that Lambda function and I'm not sure how to pass through that as a variable. So I highlight the code, I can send it to the prompt, and I can ask, based on this Lambda code that I've sent through to Amazon Q, how would I go about adding that in as an environment variable and update my code so that my Lambda function knows where to put the files and where my word cloud images will be stored. So it gives me an example of how to set those environment variables. It's set it as bucket name, and it's even generated the code to reference that bucket name for me based on the context that it has. So now that I've got all of my infrastructure set up, I think I'm ready to go and implement that feature. And for that, I'm going to use a new development feature through Amazon Q. So in order to do that, I start off with the /dev command, and then I can feed it the task that I'm actually trying to implement. So as we remember from before, I'm trying to update this word cloud image generator so that I can actually upload the files that I'm creating to S3. And then I want to be able to create a S3 pre-signed URL for that file. I specify, how I'm referencing the bucket name as well. The more specific that I make this prompt, the better the results will be for me in the end. What this feature actually does is it generates a plan for me, so I can go through and step through the changes that it's recommending for each of the files. So again, if I'm not super familiar with this code base, it's a really helpful tool to help me navigate and understand, all the different files that I need to change. I can go through and understand also what tests might be missing to ensure I've got good test coverage. I can go ahead and implement it based on this plan, or I can also ask Amazon Q to generate the code for me from there. So I think I'm going to take that option, and I'm going to start writing out that code. And then from there, I can have a look at all the files and understand if I'm happy to accept those changes, or if I need to make some tweaks, or if I need to keep iterating and prompting Amazon Q to improve on those results. So I've got my word cloud generator file that's been changed, and I can see it's added in that S3 client builder. It's also modified the function so that I'm now uploading files to S3, and I'm also generating that pre-signed URL. And now I'm returning a URL and not the raw image in bytes. I can see my model's been updated, and I can also see some of the tests have been modified as well. So now it's testing that I'm uploading and downloading that pre-signed URL. And I'm also mocking out some new tests because if it fails, I want to be able to test for that instance as well. But looking at these tests, it's not actually quite what I was after or what I had in mind before I wrote the tests. Really what I would prefer to do is to actually mock that S3 client. And I don't actually want to upload a file, and I don't actually want to sort of generate that pre-signed URL. So I'm going to get more specific and give feedback to Amazon Q. I'm going to ask it in that generate valid image test to mock the S3 client, and also and not to actually read a file from S3 and pull down an image. So I can get as specific as I like with these prompts, and again, the more specific and the better prompting that you provide, the more accurate results you're going to get that reflect your intention. There's a couple of other things missing that I noticed. A couple of imports were missing. Some dependencies were also missing from my POM.xml file. So I'm going to go through and give that feedback to Amazon Q so that it can integrate that when it regenerates the examples for me. So now that I've given it more specifics, I am going to ask it to regenerate that code, and then I'm going to analyze the results. And once again, as a developer, I go through and I analyze what results I've gotten back. I decide whether or not I'm happy to accept the changes or if I want to keep iterating. So if we have a click through, I can see once again, now that I have those import statements that I was missing, I've still got the changes that I made, but some modifications do happen as it is regenerating that code. I've got my API model has changed. It's still all good. And I can have a look at the tests. So I noticed with this test that I asked it to modify and mock the S3 client, still hasn't quite gotten it there. So, and this is not uncommon. So as a developer, I might accept these changes and then keep iterating on that code base until I'm 100% happy to raise that PR and get those changes merged. But as it stands, I've now created this new feature, and now I am returning that pre-signed URL in place of a raw image in bytes. So I've checked off my feature, and I check in with my colleague Pav to see how he's going with his.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nicola. Okay, so now that we've got our feature out of the way, we're going to move to the next task of the day, and that is to upgrade the Java version of our World Cloud API. So it's currently running Java 8. We need to upgrade to Java 17 to get the benefits of the latest security updates. Okay, so we're going to jump into our IDE. And whenever you have a version mismatch, your IDE will typically tell you and flag it for you. So we're going to fix that and ask Q to do that for us. So we're going to ask Q to do a transform for us. And whenever you do a transform, the first thing that Q is going to do is going to upload our code to a secured build environment. So that's fully private and needs that environment in order to be able to compile the code and see if there are any errors. Once that's complete, it then is going to generate something called a transformation plan. The transformation plan is just a normal text document written in plain English, and it just outlines what Q is going to do for us, and then it's going to also list the steps that it's going to take. So as you can see on the screen, it's normal document. It looks like any other README that you would have. So you can, of course, review it, read it, make sure that it's all fine. So again, we just upgrading Java version. Now there are 3 different steps that Q is going to take for us. So the first step is to update the dependencies in the code. So this typically is the most time-consuming task. The next step is to build the code in Java 17 and make sure that there are no errors. If there are errors, then Q will fix those one by one, same way as a human developer would. And then the third and final step is to finalize the code changes and then generate something called a transformation summary. And a transformation summary is actually quite useful, and we'll see what that looks like in just a second. Now, one thing to point out that on the bottom of the screen here, I don't know if you can see that, so we've got a real-time feedback and progress of where Q is at any given point in time. So as we can see right now, it's at step 1, which is just completed, which was the updating dependencies of the code and the code. And now it's at step 2, which is actually building that code and make sure there are no errors. And if there are errors, it's going to address those errors one by one. That should be completed shortly, which it is. And now it's moving to the final step, which is finalizing those changes and generating that transformation summary for us. And now we're going to jump in and just download the actual changes that Q is proposing. And we're going to open the transformation summary. So we can see there's different files that Q modified for us, and we're going to open those files and review them. And the reason why I like this is because it's sort of like reviewing a pull request from another developer. So we can see a diff, we can see what it was before, what's being proposed. And the important part here is that up to this point, Q hasn't actually made any changes to the code on our machine. It's just proposing those changes. So that's why we are reviewing them one by one. And then on the right-hand side there, in the sidebar, you can see a little mini-map, and the mini-map tells you where the changes took place, so you don't have to try to find the changes that are clearly laid out for you. All of these changes look perfectly fine. Again, this is just changing the API version of a relatively simple code base, and they all look perfectly fine to me, so now I'm going to accept that. And after I click accept, only now Q actually modified the code on my machine. And now our code is compatible with Java 17. So that concludes our tasks for the day, and I guess we can just go home early today.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you actually get started with Q? So there's a couple different plans, but Q is currently in preview. So you can actually use a lot of the features and capabilities free of charge, so you can experiment with it very freely. Now there will be 2 different plans. There'll be Amazon Q Business and Amazon Q Developer. Q Business gives you a conversational interface over your data. So what you can do is you connect your different data sources, for example, for your wikis and knowledge bases, and then your users will be able to ask questions about the data. So without it, you would have to probably have, you can search through your knowledge base, which is always a bit clunky, doesn't quite work well. If the search doesn't work, you have to run it all over again. Whereas here, you just ask a question. If it's not quite clear, you ask a follow-up question, and so on and so on and so on. So it's a very natural way of communicating. And on top of this, you also get access to Q for Amazon QuickSight. So if you've never used Amazon QuickSight, it's our business intelligence tool. It's used to visualize your data. So whenever you want to get some specific insight out of a BI tool, you would typically have to click through different things and put together a dashboard and so on. Whereas here, you don't have to do that. You can simply ask Q the question about your data, and it's going to give you the response. So again, saving you time and just communicating in a much more straightforward and natural way. Now, the Q developer plan gives you access to everything from Q business, but on top of that, you get a lot of these developer-centric tools. So you can, for example, ask questions about AWS services, ask Q to help you debug some code. You can ask Q to write features for you, or you can ask it to transform code for you between the Java versions. So there's a lot of these different developer-centric features. So whichever plan you prefer, they're both optimized for different use cases, but they give you access to quite a bit of capabilities. So that was Amazon Q, and now we're going to talk about another service that's quite closely related to Q, and that service is called Amazon Code Whisperer. So Code Whisperer is a coding companion. It uses a very powerful foundation model under the hood, and it leverages that model to give you real-time coding suggestions as you type your code. So there's a couple different ways you can go about using it. The first way is to use it as this sort of very smart autocomplete. So Code Whisperer ambiently runs in your development environment, and then when it decides that there's a particular suggestion that you may benefit from, it's going to give you that suggestion, and then you can choose to accept it, or you can simply keep typing your code as if nothing happened. And the second way to use Code Whisperer is to be a bit more proactive. So this is, you can actually give requirements to Code Whisperer as to what it is that you need help with, and you write those in plain English as programming comments. So you can write them as single-line comments or multi-line comments. It's really up to you. And that allows you to go into a lot more depth with your requirements, and you can get help with some of a lot more complex use cases. So how do you actually get started with it? So first things first, you have to sign up for something called a Builder ID. It's a free account. You actually don't need an AWS account to sign up for it. Once you have your Builder ID, then in your coding editor, you have to install an extension called AWS Toolkit, and then you simply sign in with your Builder ID into the extension, and you're good to go. So we support a variety of different IDEs. So we support different flavors of the JetBrains IDEs. We support VS Code, Visual Studio, Cloud9. You can actually use it directly in the Lambda console as well, and you can also use it with SageMaker Studio and Glue Studio. On the programming language side of things, we support most major programming languages. So we support Python, Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, C#, Go, and many other ones. We recently added support for infrastructure as code, so you can use it with CloudFormation, CDK, and Terraform. And of course, support for more programming languages and IDEs is on the way. Now to go through some key benefits of Code Whisperer. So first of all, we want you to be more productive as developers, and we want you to be more productive with simple tasks and also more complex tasks. So simple tasks are things they take up your time. They're boilerplate. You don't want to do it. You have to do it. So it could be, for example, data handling. You have to parse a file, or you have to generate sample data for your tests, things like that. So Code Whisperer can help you with that, of course. Also, when it comes to more complex tasks, this could be, for example, leveraging new libraries, new framework in your project. So without Code Whisperer, the way you typically would go about it, you would go run a search, find the documentation for the library, read through it. Hopefully they've got an example. If not, put together an example, then go back to your IDE, and then you can experiment with it finally. So there's this very slow feedback loop, and there's quite a bit of friction because you have to switch back and forth between two different things. So with Code Whisperer, you don't have to do any of that. You simply write a couple of comments saying, hey, I want to use this particular library, and I want to accomplish this particular task with it, and then Code Whisperer will give you a code snippet directly in your IDE. So there's a much more shorter feedback loop, and you don't have to just switch between different things back and forth. Of course, this being an AWS service, we specifically trained it on our own services, our APIs, our SDKs. So if you are working with the AWS stack, you can get these crisp, very relevant suggestions, again, directly in your IDE. A few different things I wanted to highlight. So there's been a lot of talk lately about responsible use of AI. In the context of Code Whisperer, what that means is we want you to know where the code suggestion may be coming from. So the foundation model that powers Code Whisperer was trained on billions of lines of code, and some of that code was open source, some of that code was our own code. And whenever Code Whisperer generates code that matches code from a particular library, it's going to highlight that for you. It's going to say, hey, this particular code snippet is coming from this library, and this library has this particular license type. And then you as a developer can decide whether you want to use it or not. Because in some specific cases, you may not even be able to use it because the license may prohibit whatever use case you're building for. So we want you to have this information up front so that you can make an informed decision. Another key benefit of Code Whisperer is improving application security. So this is a capability of Code Whisperer that allows you to run on-demand application security scans, again, directly in your IDE. So you simply press one single button, and then Code Whisperer will analyze your code, and it's going to look for known vulnerabilities. It's going to scrutinize it against OWASP top 10 application security rules, against our own security best practices. And if it happens to find some issues, it's going to flag that for you. It's going to say, hey, here's a potential issue, and here's why. And also on top of that, it's going to actually propose you a fix for that issue. So it's going to show you what a fix looks like, and if you want to, you can accept it. You click one single button, and it's going to fix that issue in place in your IDE. And lastly, Code Whisperer integrates with Amazon Q. So what that allows you to do, you can have a conversational interface over your code. Again, that runs in your IDE. So this is a third way you can engage Code Whisperer. You can simply have a conversation back and forth about your code. And a couple different good use cases for that. So the first one is debugging your code. So say you've got a particular function or a class that's erroring out. So you can simply open that file and you can ask in the chat, hey, I'm running this code, I'm getting this error, what's wrong? And then you can work with Q on fixing that issue. Another potential use case could be working on some code base that hasn't been touched in a long time. There's no good documentation for it. So you can ask Q, okay, can you explain what this code is doing for me? And it's going to write you a little README about it, so you can learn more about it. So it's a bit like pair programming with a developer that knows your code base extremely well. Now, when it comes to code generation, the interesting thing about Code Whisperer is that it's going to try to learn your coding style. So it's going to look at things like how you name your variables, your functions, your classes, how you indent things, how you space things, how you capitalize variables and things like that. And it's going to learn those different styling intricacies of your coding style. And then when it generates code for you, it's going to modify it so it really looks like your code. So I find that whenever I look at code that's written in my style, it's easier to read it, and also it's easier to pick up any potential issues. And also, ultimately, what we want to achieve here, we want to minimize the amount of changes you have to make to the code that Code Whisperer generates before you can actually start using it and accepting those changes. So by making the code look like it's your own, we're getting closer and closer to that goal. Now, one of the features that we released at reInvent is this ability to customize Code Whisperer. So Code Whisperer has this concept of a context window. And a context window is just additional information that Code Whisperer has in order to customize its suggestions for you. So if you were to, for example, start a brand new project, so you're opening your IDE, there's no code in it, you're opening an empty file, at that point in time, Code Whisperer will have zero context. So it's still going to be useful, but it's going to, any suggestion that it gives you, it's going to be, they're going to be a bit generic. But as soon as you add more and more code to that file, then it's going to be able to analyze that and then customize those coding suggestions based on what's in that file. And the way you typically provide context is by opening different files. And that whatever files you have open in your IDE, that is the additional context that Code Whisperer has. But if you're working on a big code base, it can be quite tiring to keep opening and closing different files. So for that reason, we allow you to customize it. And the way you go about it, you simply link your code base privately in your AWS account, and then Code Whisperer will get the context of your entire code base. Of course, this is done fully privately. We don't share it with anyone. We don't use it for training. This is purely so Code Whisperer has context of your code base. And then when you work with it, you don't have to keep opening files because that context is already known, so you can get much better suggestions. To give you an idea what it looks like, so here's a fictitious example of a food delivery company. And the task that we gave to Code Whisperer is to process a list of unassigned food deliveries around the driver's current location. So it's a very specific requirement. And without the context of our code base, Code Whisperer will still satisfy this requirement, but it would give you this sort of generic solution to this particular challenge. But because in this specific case, this company chose to customize Code Whisperer is able to infer that this task can actually be completed with code from this code base. And as you can see on the screen, that's the code snippet that it gave, which in this specific case is what the developer was asking for. So if you've never used Code Whisperer, definitely recommend you to get started with it. So there's a few different resources on the screen. The first one is just getting started guide, how you actually install it and so on. The second one is around customization of Code Whisperer. And the third one is a deep dive workshop to show you some of the key techniques that you can apply to get the most value out of Code Whisperer. Now, if you want to learn more about generative AI, there's a couple of different resources I've got for you. The first one is from AWS.training, which is our training portal. And there are different paths depending who you are. So there's a separate path for developers, another one for data scientists, and then another one for DevOps engineers, all in the context of generative AI. And also, if you've never heard of Skill Builder, so Skill Builder is our learning and development portal. And we have a large collection of lessons, tutorials, workshops on a variety of different topics. Some of those topics are on cloud or security, or some of it is on generative AI as well, but it's more of a different topics across the board. That's all we had. Thank you very much. And this is, of course, an AWS conference, so if you've got a few seconds, please scan the QR code on the right and just give us a rating, and hopefully, if we do well, we'll be invited to come back here and talk to you next year.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Feel free to come see us at the Amazon Q developer booth as well. Cheers.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicola and Pav.
Thanks.